Baruchim Aboyim B'Shem Hashem. It's a great kavod to welcome everybody to this beautiful Chanukas Habayis on this magnificent building, Binyan Chavasara. Binyan Chavasara, this building was built, L'Zecher U'Leili Nishmas, Rebbe Sheila Feinstein Aleh Shalom. She was with us every step of the way, every brick, every stone, everything that was done. She was on our minds. Her inspiration carried us through. The pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh, "Hinei anochi noiseh lifneichem hayom bracha u'klala." The pasuk says, "Hasabracha asher tishmu." Many of the mefarshim shtel sich on the lashon asher tishmu. You would have thought that the pasuk would say, "Hasabracha im tishmu." You'll have bracha im tishmu if you listen. It's not what the Torah Kedosha says. It says, "Hasabracha asher tishmu." The bracha is that you will listen. The Yeshiva Zatzal said many times, the Yeshiva Shlita quotes it all the time. The answer is that a life of Torah is in itself bracha. It's not a Tanai. Es habracha im tishmu. It's a fact. Es habracha asher tishmu. If you live a life of Torah, ultimately it's a wonderful life. The Rebbe Aleh Shalom personified this. She personified that a life of Torah is a life of dignity, a life of beauty, ultimately a life of success. And this building, with everything that went into it, was her vision, her dream, that the Torah HaKadoshah should have a beautiful home. That when it comes to Yeshiva Bacharim and Yeshiva Light, coming into a Bais Medrash to sit and learn Torah, it should be comfortable. It should be well lit. It should be beautiful. It should be a Migdash Ma'at, worthy of the name. And that's what we strove to build, and we hope that this is what it will be. It will be a beautiful home for the Torah HaKadoshah, a beautiful home that will resonate with the Kol Torah. There's a lot to say, but we're on a schedule. We have a great kavod today to have with us the Yeshiva of Yeshiva's Darkei Torah of Yaakov Bender Shlita. Rabbi Bender has a decades-long relationship, goes back to the time of the Yeshiva Zatzal and the Yeshiva Shlita and the Rebbetzin. And Rabbi Bender is really uniquely suited to address us here today. As an eminent Rosh Yeshiva, he certainly has in his bones the essence of Kavod HaTorah, and to address us on the topic of Kavod HaTorah is easy. As an eminent educator, he shared the same passions as the Rebbetzin Aleh Shalom, who had a lifelong passion for teaching, a lifelong passion of giving over the Messiah to the next generation. So it's a great kavod to call upon Rabbi Bender to speak to us to mark this occasion.
I appreciate the kind words very much. Guzmais, it's wonderful. Nice, anyways. One thing I know to tell Yeshiva, you mentioned something before, decades-long relationship with Yeshiva. You know, my mother's great aunt was married to Yeshiva Ramesh's brother. And he always, when he called, my mother was a Holocaust survivor. Michal Shklubber used to call, my Dachzach used to call him. And my mother, she didn't have any cravings, had no mishpacha. So one time, Ramesh said to my mother, "You know, I lost my whole mishpacha in Europe because she came to America, leaving behind his entire family. I mean, the siblings and so on." He says, "Anna, what to make my mother feel good?" He says, "You know, you lost your family. We're not really related. It's a chataniship, whatever it is. We have mishpacha now." My mother felt confident. She taught Taras and mishpacha. She used to call Ramesh on a regular basis. He took care of her feelings. This is what runs through the genes of the Feinstein mishpacha. B'shus, Marna, Gaina, Gadol, Ruvain, or Shiva Zang is not stark. Kala Kodesh Hazeh. He did nafshi from playground Shlem Yeshua Edelman. Give credit to people who work so hard and they don't get the credit. People work in the front office. We grew up together. Kanahara. You walk into this building, you see what's going on over here. The kaiches, they get put in by everybody. Grace is chus from me. Had I know Rebbe Sheila Feinstein? Mishpach, obviously. Close friends. But I used to talk to her regularly. Regularly. But chinuch and yanim. She had verstanden what it means a child. She understood problems. She was the official advisor, unofficial advisor to the yeshiva here. You know that. Nothing in the yeshiva happened without her. People came to talk to her all the time. And once he asked her this question, how she able to sort of compartmentalize, to hear the problems and be a happy person. She was a Tim garnished. Unless someone gathered around him. And then they come to him, help us. They saw he has something. And he became one of the shaftim of Klal Yisrael. You can't give up. They gave up on him. His brother said, get out of here, Beni Shazayna. You're not part of us. And look what happened. Look what the great Yiftach ended up accomplishing. It wasn't Yeshua, but he was Yiftach HaGiladi. The Rebbe Tzimmer verstanden what it means Yeshiva Bachar. How she loved the Bachar. How she loved it. But there's nothing that happened to Yeshiva without her in the Yeshiva. It wasn't Shaykh. She loved the Bachar. She loved every Bachar like her own. And you can talk to any problem. There's a gracer, Rachbus Adas. She had, her heart was big enough. This Rashi, heart was big enough. Logusham Harbe Tzar. And stick to a Simchas HaChaim. That's a freedom mensch, a lichtige mensch, a freilige mensch. It was just such a pleasure meeting her. Every time I saw her, I said, I'm going to say hello to her, sit down with her for a minute, talk to her about something. She's verstanden the psyche of people. She understood the psyche, what's going on in their minds. She had good advice, understanding. And of course, Yad Yemina, going to her Yeshiva, saying, it's stark for longer good to yarn, which we hope will continue for many happy and healthy years to come to Yeshiva. I was thinking to myself, I heard it, the Kalamukas over Shabbos. Anu Tefillah, that her's a Karen, her Meisen Taivan. I have a lot of stories with Anui Marach. They said there's a schedule. I'm going to stick to my part of the schedule. Stories of her caring about people beyond, privately, zero covered. Was not interested in any covered for herself. Zero. I think it was the Yeshiva. She was not, she didn't need anything. She garnished Gedav Tabin. Aaron HaKoyin, you don't find Davin. Yesterday's parsha, Mei Meriva. What happened to Aaron HaKoyin? Question we don't think about. Moshe Rabbeinu was spal, V'eschanan 515 tefillahs to get into Eretz Yisrael. Aaron HaKoyin, why? Zon Chazal, he wanted to be B'kayim mitzvahs atluyas ba'aretz. He wanted to be B'kayim mitzvahs. Where was Aaron HaKoyin? Why don't we find any David? Time to be nifter Aaron HaKoyin? Har. Allah says taking over for you? He didn't have it. Chanukas says the part. Chanukas of Shundig, deep. It's hard to even say over, but you know, he has more to get the hair. You know, because why Aaron didn't have it? He says Aaron HaKoyin didn't have it. You know why? Because Aaron HaKoyin knew that when he's being nifter, the Miklat, they come out. Now, was the Miklat yet done or not? Not the point. Aaron HaKoyin says even 1 second extra, I should daven on the backs of the people who would be freed when he's nifter. I can't do it. Like Alamukas, I can't do it. Me? Of course I want to live to be kind to Mitzvah's Baritz. We have a couple. Kuloi was Kuloi was Nor Yenim. Yenim and Yenim and Yenim and Yenim. Yeshiva Zang is stark. His Ava, his Frankheit, his Edelkeit, never gets upset. You call him, you bother him, nothing. All wonderful. His Ava to every single person. How he loves every single person. That was a shtick Rebbe and Sheila, this couple was together. Unbelievable couple. To dedicate a Bais Medrash, nothing would make her happier than the Kavarat Torah of dedicating a Bais Medrash in Hazakaran, a Bais Medrash building in Hazakaran, because nothing would make her more zufrieden. So happy of Yenim Welt. You know that. Chazal tell us, she got up there and got all schar she's going to get for many. Infinite schar. We lost her. But it's being perpetuated by the fact that she would be the most zufrieden mensch. That every child should have a chance to sit and learn. Every child could make it. Every child could learn to dedicate a Bais Medrash to her. It's a gemaldige Zach. Kadei Baruch Hu should bench to Yeshiva. Because Yom Mishanim, Kaicha Starker Mitzvah Hashem. He should lead Klal Yisrael for many happy, healthy years. And there's a chronice of this Heilige Frei, what she did for him and for the Yeshiva of Statne and Bechlal, for everybody, should live on through the Yeshiva for long and good to yearn. Thank you for listening, Koltov.
Thank you, Rabbi Bender. If we look at the wall of the Bais Medrash to my right, we have two doors that lead out to our beautiful, I don't know what you want to call it, Bais Medrash Achitzaim. Some people have used that word, but a beautiful place for the Bachrim to go learn outside. I would mention right now that Rav Weiss Zatzal, when I would drive him to Shachris on the golf cart, he commented to me many, many times, he loved watching the Bachrim learn outside. He would see them learning and he would kvel. And he told me once, he said, I asked the Bachrim what we could do for them. And they told me, get us more tables so we could learn outside and enjoy the fresh air. Those two doors, one says Shar Shimon, and of course it's named after Rav Shimon Mendel, Zechet Tzadik Livracha. Rav Shimon, besides his absolute mastery and godless in Torah, I think when you mention Rav Shimon's name, the first thing that comes to Bachrim's Yungalite, first thing that comes to their mind are the lines of Bachrim and Yungalite waiting to speak to him, waiting to be Shayel Eitzah, getting into the van and driving to Lakewood with him, going to Lakewood so that they might be able to come back to Yeshiva with him in the morning to be Shayel Eitzah. All sorts of machinations, how to be able to get 10 minutes with Rav Shimon to speak to him and to learn from him and to gain from his wisdom. What was the secret? Why is it that his Eitzah was so sought after? I don't claim to know, to have an absolute answer to it, but I have a theory, and I'll mention it for what it's worth. We have a parsha in the Torah Hakadosh, at the beginning of Parshas Vayera. We have the parsha that teaches us the Torah Hakadosh's thoughts, the Torah Hakadosh's hadracha on Chesed. The pasuk says by Avram Avinu and the Malachim, it says Vayisa Einav Vayar. He lifted up his eyes and he saw the Malachim. V'nei shloisha anashim nitzavim alav. Then the pasuk says Vayar again. So Rashi says Vayar Vayar Shnei Pamim. Why do we need Vayar twice? So Rashi says the first one is just a Lashon Re'iyah. The second one is a Lashon Havana. Understanding. He saw them and then he understood. Rashi says, what did he understand? He understood that the Malachim didn't want to approach him and be matriachim. All right. What is the Torah telling me? Is the Torah telling me the godless of Avram Avinu, that he recognized that they don't want to be matriachim, so he got up and he ran after them? Is that the only point that the Torah Hakadosh is making? I think not. I think what the Torah Hakadosh is telling me is that every aspect of Avram Avinu's chesed was based on a vayar and a vayar. Every time Avram Avinu did a chesed, it was with a histaklos and with a havana. If he served chema, v'chalav, whatever he did for them, it was based on a havana, that's what they needed. If you want to know how Avram Avinu was eicha to make es hanefesh asher asu b'charon, How was he Zoicha to be Makar of all those people? How did he connect with them? It was because he had a Havana, because he looked at every person and sensed what they needed. Giving Eitzah, if you're a Rebbe, you could have, over the decades, you could be asked the same question 300 times by 300 different Bachar. It's the same question. And you could have a canned answer. They ask you the question, and you give answer number 6. I've heard that question already so many times. I have my shita, I have my derech. But does that help the individual that you're speaking to? Are you sure that you're addressing his needs? Many of you here in this room were in the position over the years of speaking to Rav Shimon. And when Rav Shimon listened to you, the look on his face was as if he was learning a sugya. And he was learning a shvera sugya. He had his eyes closed. He would sit there with that squint, and he would listen, and he would ask. He would say, so what are you asking? And he would make you repeat, and he would listen, and he would think, because he was learning a shvera sugya. He was stepping into your shoes to figure out what you needed. And I think that's why his Eitzah was such a sought-after Eitzah, because he connected with your nefesh. He looked into you and he addressed your particular needs in your situation. The other doorway says Shar Yaina. Rabbi Yoni Cohn was a personal friend of mine. Very different walk of life. He was a gvir, very, very successful in business, very tire fellow. He had the same kayach. When he did chesed, the lettering that I put up there, it says that he was a Baal Maisim Toiv v'Gam Chasadim Nifla. And that's what he was. He did tremendous chasadim. But when he did chesed, that's what he did. When somebody came to him to ask him for help, he had the ability to step into his shoes and see what's the help that he needs, not what's the help that he asked for. What does he need? And that's what he went to do. He went to go and take care of the person the way he needed it. I could tell you countless stories of how after Hurricane Irene, he went personally. This was a man who could have afforded to hire as many work crews as he wanted. He went personally with pumps and wet dry vacs to go pump out people's basements. He didn't have somebody else do it. People wondered why. It was because he was going to see what damage they had. And then he went to find out if they were able to absorb the damage financially. And if they weren't, he made it his business to help out anonymously. He never wanted to be acknowledged. He didn't want it to be known. I was not aware originally that Reb Shimon Zatzal and Reb Yaina Zechreinu Livracha knew each other. But I found out at the last minute that they did. How did they get to know each other? Reb Shimon, when he was diagnosed, he was taken into Robert Wood Johnson Hospital in New Jersey. Robert Wood Johnson Hospital didn't have a very well put together Bikur Chaylim situation. When Rabbi Yaina moved with his family to Edison, they lived there for several years. He saw the need. He purchased the building across the street from Robert Wood Johnson and opened up the Chaim B'Chesed house. A beautiful, well-stocked, well-provisioned home for people who never were going through a hard time and had loved ones in the hospital. When he found out that there was a Chashuv Magid Shir from Yeshiva Staten Island in a bad situation, he immediately got on a plane. He was a pilot. He had his own plane. He got on a plane. He flew to New Jersey. He took care of everything that they needed. He helped them out with doctors, and he wouldn't leave. And he came to know Rav Shimon, and they struck up a close friendship. Rav Shimon, as we all know, was nifter on Erev Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yaina was nifter at a very young age, Isru Chag Sukkos, Nebuch in a car accident. And they got to know each other, like I wrote on the plaque outside, Shenischabru b'soif yamehem. Who would have known? But at the end of their days, they got to know each other. They gained tremendous appreciation for each other. And Mrs. Cohn, she should be well, took it upon herself to make this dedication in the memory of both of them. Thank you. Of course, on the top of that wall, it says Heichel Gershon Yaakov, named after our unforgettable Benal Ruchni, Rav Gershon Weiss, Chesadik Kodesh Levracha. I mentioned before how Rav Weiss enjoyed watching the Bachrim learn outside. One other thing that I would mention personally, quickly, when I think of Rav Weiss, I think that there was one question that Rav Weiss always taught us to ask, whether it was in Shir, whether it was in Divrei Musar, whether it was in our Mahalach HaChaim, and that is 3 letters. Why? He always made us ask why. Why does Rashi choose the words that he chose? Why does the pasuk say it this way? But also, why? Why do you get up in the morning and come to the Bais Medrash and put on tefillin? Why do you daven? Why are you here in the Bais Medrash learning Torah? Is it just because that's what everybody does? Is it Mitzvah Anoshim Ulamada? Is that all it is? Or is there something deeper? I hope that in this Bais Medrash that carries his name, we'll never forget to stop asking the question why. And we should always know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And now, it's a great covet to call upon his son, Munal Ruchni, Rav Chaim Yitzchak Weiss Shlita, to give Divrei Zikaron on his father.
Gathered here to be mechanech, Snu Bais Medrash, Chanukas Habayis. We're here to Zikaron of all the people that this Bais Medrash was built, Lila Nishmasam. There's something very different about this Chanukas Habayis. Usually the plaques on the wall, the dedication is from some Gvir's father, grandfather, grandmother. To have a Bais Medrash, to have a building, the binyan, Chavasara, the Bais Medrash, that etched in the stone is the history, is the shroshim of the yeshiva, of what made this place, what made this makom of Bayis Megadlim Torah V'yira. This is part of what Staten Island is so different than other makaimis. It was a big surprise. The Yeshiva wanted to name the Bais Medrash after my father Zatzal. The Yeshiva Shlita took on to raise money to build this building. The first thing is you try to find that some gevir that's going to pay a nice money to be able to get his name on the building. But the Yeshiva Shlita wanted to be kaveya. The building, the Zeicher, should be the memory of the people that were here, instrumental in the whole Anhagas HaYeshiva. tremendous Chanukas Habayis to the Yeshiva Shlita, and for all those that had the achrayus to help with the Yeshiva of raising the money. It was harder because they had to raise the money. What could have came a lot easier. It says, the Medrash says that Bilam says, the Medrash gives a mashal to somebody that wanted to cut down a tree. So somebody that doesn't understand what a tree, he starts cutting off the branches. So the Medrash says that Bilam said that I'm going to cut the shroshim. I'll cut from the shroshim and I don't have to go start cutting off each shavit separately. I'll cut off from the shroshim and then Mamela, the whole tree will fall down. And at that Bilam said, Miroy Surim Erenu, Umagvayis Ashurenu, the Chazokim V'Abais Imois, like Tzurim Umagvayis. Klal Yisrael, you can't tamper with, to cut down the tree of Klal Yisrael. Bilam was trying to separate Klal Yisrael from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be Makal Klal Yisrael. Is Bilam wanted to find the time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kel Zayim Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zayim Rega, and he wanted to find the Makom to be mafrid, to separate Klal Yisrael from the Dveikus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he said, Meroy Surim Erenu, I can't touch those Shroshim. Bilam said, Matoivu Alecha Yaakov, Mishkanesecha Yisrael. The Gemara says that Vayafach Hashem Esaklolo Lebracha Kehevcha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu switched the Klolo to Bracha. So it says the Eibishter Bilam wanted to be Makalo, and the Eibishter switched everything from Klolo to Bracha. But B'chulam Chazru L'Klolos. Bilam's Leiv Ra, his Midas Ra, his Kavana Ra, that he wanted to be Makalo. B'chulam Chazru L'Klolos. Chutz from Matoiva Alecha Yaakov Mishkanesecha Yisrael. The safe, secure place that Klal Yisrael has, that Ummas Ha'olam can't disconnect us from our Dveikus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is Matoivu Alecha Yaakov Mishkanesecha Yisrael. The Batei Knesiyos, the Batei Medrashos, that are built on Meiroi Surim Erenu, that are built on the Shroshim of the Avis, you can't be touched. Bilam has no Makom Knisa in such a Makom. He can't go in. It's a Makom of Ashrayis Hashchina. Bilam's Klala can't affect. This Bais Medrash, who's Mushrash from Imois and the Abbas, the Rebbetzin Alei Shalom, which my father Zatzal said by the Levaya, was the Eimah Yeshiva who cared for the Toivas HaYeshiva, gave that certain motherly touch to make sure the aesthetics of the yeshiva, the Bachram had what they need. That Chachmas Nashim Bonsa Beisa, the bias, the Binyan HaYeshiva, that bias of Lekarasi Lishti Alabesi, the Rosh Hashiva's bias extended itself to be the bias of the bias for the yeshiva, not just the Bais Medrash, the share rooms, the dining room. Tremendous chizuk HaTorah that's going to come out of this building. As Rabbi Yisrael mentioned, every brick they were thinking about, is this going to be the Svias Ratzon of the Rebbetzin? And Yaakov Gottman, we owe tremendous Chanukas Habayis for undertaking this project and seeing it through. He's somebody that gets upset if he gets mentioned. But he knew how to delegate the different parts, and he knew the aesthetics, and that motherly touch is not for him, and he gave it out to other people to make sure that there was that the chitzonius should be the svias ritzona of the Rebbetzin. But the toich of the Bais Medrash, the Heichal Gershon Yaakov, the toich of the Torah of the Bais Medrash, has to also carry the toich and continue of the toich that was permeated with my father's Zatzal, with the Rosh Yeshiva, with the Anhala, with the Rabbeim, should continue that flavor of that ruach of this Bais Medrash that Yeshiva was built on. The Yeshiva Shlita originally, they heard over when he took on the project, people say it's easy to raise money for a building. It's an easy thing. The first minus he did was gave away the name. But the second thing, he didn't realize that people aren't as excited to give for a summer Bais Medrash. It's 2 months a year. If you spread it to a few weeks in Elul, people come before. Okay, you can have maybe 4 months. People want the name on a Bais Medrash for a full year Bais Medrash. It says that the Torah brings down that the different regalim are connected to Avis, the different Avis. So it says Sukkos is connected Yaakov, Yaakov Nasa Sukkoisa, by even like Bais. Yaakov was Nasa Sukkoisa, Al Kain Kara Shem Amakim Sukkos. So we have Sukkos, Al Shem the Sukkos. The Pella is that why are we calling it Al Shem the Makom? He built himself a Bais. For his family, he built himself a Bais. And for the Mekneu, he built Sukkos. Why are we calling the place Sukkos? Al Shem what he built for the Mekneu. Some Chazisel Brady said that the Targum says, "Vayiben loy Bais, ubana loy Bais Medrash." The bias wasn't the bias of his house for his kids. The bias was ubana loy Bais Medrash. He says the Torah is coming to tell us that even though Yaakov was in Sukkos, he was temporary. He's on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and he's building for his Sukkos. They're in huts, but a Bais Medrash has to be kavua. Even loy Bais, even in the most temporary time, a Bais Medrash has to have a kviyas. The bias, the base with Shoyer Shchinasai, that's the nitzrius. When we talk about zman of limud HaTorah of tefillah, there's no such a thing as it's only a short time. It's a temporary thing. Every moment is nitzrius. To stel avek the nitzrius of a Beis HaMedrash, a Beis HaKnesses. The Yeshiva Zatzal says in the droshes, the Darish Moshe, he says that it says, "Kol hakavei makom l'tfilasai." It says, why is it dafka if you're daven in a Beis HaKnesses? Why do you need to daven dafka in a Beis HaKnesses? What's wrong? The Eibishter is Maloicha la'aretz kevaydai. Maloicha la'aretz kevaydai. The Eibishter is everywhere. Why do you have to have a makom miyuchat for tefillah? My father, Zechrein Levracha, brings down from the Yeshiva Zatzal and the Igris. The Rambam says, "Kol makom sheyesh by asarim Yisrael tzarich la'achon lebayis shekonsu by l'tefillah." So he says the Rambam doesn't say, the Yeshiva Zatzal's medayik, the Rambam doesn't say that you need a daven b'minyan, so find a place to daven. That's eichatimtza. A makom a bayis where the daven is just eichatimtza. You see, there's a din of shtelling avek a Beis HaKnesses, which the Rambam says that the Beis HaKnesses has to be in the highest place of the ear, A city has to be surrounded, that the bias, what is the focal point? Where do we live? We live in the Beis HaKnesses. We live in the shul, we live in the Bais Medrash. That's the mokum of our bias. The chashivas that a person, the Yeshiva Zatzal says, the chashivas that we have to give for a Beis HaKnesses is if a person is living in Olam Hazadik world, and his kviyas is in Olam Hazeh, and he feels that he's secure and settled here, and that's what Olam Hazeh is, his kviyas. And he needs some help once in a while, and he has to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for rachamim, for chesed, parnosa, hatzlacha. That's a person that's davok in Olam Hazeh. And once in a while, he has to ask a request to get something delivered. Tefillah is answered if a person knows that his whole metzias, his whole mahus of his tefillah is, he's here in Olam Hazeh as a proizdel of Olam Haba. And the kviyas of Olam Hazeh is the kviyas of the makom of the Torah and tefillah. Ramchal and Derech Hashem, he says the Eibush to put a person in this world to be noig b'seichel, to learn Torah, mitzvahs, but he also gave him a job to mefakeach al tzrachav. He has to go take care of himself in the Olam Hazeh. He has to take care of himself in the Olam Hagashmi. A person has to live roishe sulam mutzav arza v'roishe magia shamayma. He says, how could you expect of a person that's involved in Olam Hazeh to live with his whole focus and direction for Olam Haba? He has to be busy being oisik for Olam Hazeh. So he says, to put a person in Olam Hazeh, it's a yerida for him. It's an ilui yerida l'tzarech aliyah. A person is lowering himself, getting involved in the nisyonis in Olam Hazeh, but through that he's being mis'ala and he's going up. He says, if a person gets sunk into Olam Hazeh, he says, "Kafima sheyarbe l'stabach b'nyonei olam, kach misrachik min ha'or ha'elyon u'mischashech yoser." The more a person gets tangled up in Olam Hazeh, he gets misrachik from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he goes into darkness. So the Eibishter made a tikkun for that. And the Eibishter made that a person should come ahead and daven. It's not that you're living in this world and when you need help, you call for help. The Eibishter was kaveya that a person realizes that he has to be miskarif to HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'yamid l'fonav yizbarach, and he should be shoyl tzrachav v'olav yashlech yahavai. That is his step number one of realizing where everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, after that, anything that he's mishtadel b'olam hazeh is he knows that it's all coming from Hashgacha, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's all coming with the Hashpah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's what Yeshiva Zatzal says. The kviyas of tefillah, the kviyas makom of realizing that my makom is a makom that yishtel avek, that whatever I do is I have a job over here to take care of an olam hazeh, but everything is hashgacha elyoina, everything is for avodas Hashem. That could change everything over in olam hazeh to become a ruchnis dekazach. There's no arai, there's no, it's 2 months, 3 months. There's nitzrius, the chizuk, that has to be avekeshtelt. A mokim kavua, that you feel that this is my home. This is the place that I want to be. The Yeshiva Shlita spoke about Bashal Shudis. Other times we heard from the Yeshiva the benefits of camp, being around the Shimish Talmidei Chachamim, my impression from what motivated my father Zatzal about coming up to the country was after Bachrim, that the Mesivta has the regions, and they're all burnt out after cramming the regions. It's downhill, there's no English. How do you expect, what are you supposed to do with Bachrim then? There's no English. So usually yeshivas do make a lighter schedule, make a shtickle camp. So the yeshiva decided, came up to the country, made the Sabekestelt. But when I talk to parents, the camp is a lot more pressure than yeshiva. A Mesivta Bacha in yeshiva, you have English, you have time out, it's not so strict. But in camp, the pressure is all the way up to the top. It's the end of the marathon, to the running, to the final line of finishing the Masechta, of having 3 shiurim on Shabbos, and chapping a rein, and beginnis after beginnis, and not only the bifnim, but the Baal Peh. A tremendous pressure to finish up. And the Bachram need a time to let out. So you have your frisbee. I'm always to be baseball. I see the Bachram don't play baseball anymore. But the paddleball is a frisbee. I see frisbee to go a little in the pool. You let out the pressure, and you're ready now to go for the next round. In the light that came for Shabbos, their impression of remembering camp was camp. The memories of camp was pressure. Camp was a lot of pressure, a lot of learning, a lot of chazara. To be able to, there's never to be oimid ba'peretz, to be able to be finding eitzes, betachbulas tasa milchama, to be able to find eitzes of always having chizuk, to take an azman rifyan, amoyed v'schazik boy, v'atanoit l'schar keneged kulam, to always find eitzes of how to do things to be mechazik the yeshiva. At the same time, when I was a kid, my father had something called Yeshiva Sakayitz. Today, the name was changed. It's not a very popular name. Yeshiva Sakayitz is not going to attract anybody to... Today, it has to be something more enticing. Ruach HaKayitz. But it was a musig of Yeshiva Sakayitz. My father Zatzal said, camps used to have Bachrim as Rabbeim. They didn't have classrooms. It wasn't a formal learning. And he undertook at the same time that they were in Westmount then. My father was then in Lakewood House, the first place with the yeshiva. The yeshiva first rented the Lakewood House in Rock Hill. That afterwards my father decided he's going to rent a place and start for other yeshivas. And he used to travel back and forth between, we stayed over there in Rock Hill, and he used to travel to Westmount. It was 5-6 years that he ran a camp, and he had many people, Talmidim afterwards, that were nis'ala from that matziv. So he was zeicher to have a binyan that he was oimid ba'peretz in the Zman Rifyan, to stel avek a kviyas, to stel avek such a pe'er of a mokim Torah. There's Gocha feared that my brother has the second half, the mamshech, that what my father did with Yeshiva Sakayitz, to be other people to have te'eles of chizuk over the summer. My father's Zatzal in Bikvei Atzoin, he has a shtickle over here that he brings down the Yeshiva's Zatzal's Shaila. The Yeshiva Shlita talks about this also, says over this shtickle. The Gemara says in Bava Basra that Bilam, when he saw She'em Peschem Chavanim, Rashi brings down, he had this ruach, he didn't want to mikal them. and he saw how the psachim and the oil, they're not mechuvanim, and they're all sitting l'shvatav. They're sitting b'tznius, and each shevet separately. So he had a ruach, and he was mevarach them, and he said, "Ma toivu alecha Yaakov mishkanesecha Yisrael." The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that everything that Bilam said, he wanted to say a klala, and the Eibishter was ma'akim piv and turned it into and made him say a bracha. And one of the things he wanted to say, that it shouldn't be bate knesiyos, it shouldn't be bate midrashas. So the Yeshiva Zatzaliyas, that the Chayr, the Rav Yochanan, both of them are Rav Yochanan, and they're sides to each other. So the Yeshiva Zatzal says that Bilam Rasha was trying to connivingly, he was telling Klal Yisrael, "Matoivo elecha Yaakov mishkanesecha Yisrael." He's saying you have gewaldike homes. Look at your homes. Look at the tznius, gewaldike bate. Look at the houses. Was dabs the bate knesiyos, the bate midrashas? Why do you need a Beis HaKnesses and Beis Medrash? You have your homes. Keep your kids at home. They'll be nischanich from the parents. Such gewaldike parents. Why do you need bate knesiyos and bate midrashas? What he was saying is the bracha was, it was a klala of taking them out of the bate knesiyos and stay at home. What is the problem? So a person is at home, is avada. You don't have the maila of a person is shesulim beveis Hashem b'chatzos alekeinu yafrichu. Person's living at home is avada the mizbeach shulchan daimel mizbeach and the shulchan's the mizbeach and there's the eats, but the life of Torah is part of the mundane life. The musik to realize that the kviyas and oilam hazeh is only in Torah and tefillah. That is the Beis Hashem, Eshtachave, V'ani beroiv chazdecha avoi beisecha. The Mailas HaTorah says, Eshtachave el beisecha, V'ani beroiv chazdecha avoi beisecha. The Eibishter's bias is the bias of the Beis Knesses and Beis Medrashas. The Beis Knesses and Beis Medrashas is the mokem of Ashrayis Hashchina. Zasidim, but they can see us about the Medrashas of Babel. They're going to go to Eretz Yisrael. They're going to be oiler to Eretz Yisrael. They're going to go to Eretz Yisrael because the Eibush Sheikhin Mishkanesecha Yisrael, the Ashrayis Hashchina is in the Beis HaKnesses and the Beis HaMedrash. The Siyata Deshmaya to be get Torah, the Siyata Deshmaya to be Zoichet to Torah is you need Ki Hashem Yitein Chochma Mipiv Das Usvuna. The Koyach of Torah is you need the Ashrayis Hashchin in the Beis HaMedrash is the Malamid Torah Lama Yisrael. That is Malamid the Torah to Klal Yisrael. In a Beis HaKnesses comes along the Malamid HaTorah. We say over many times the Medrash in the beginning of Truma, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ki lekach toiv nasati lachem toirasi al tazoivu. Is yesh lecha mekach that a person sells something, but the Baal HaMekach doesn't come along with it. But there's a mekach, sometimes you sell a company, and the CEO comes along with it to teach, to keep it running. People own the company, but they can't run the company. The Eibishter says, the Baal HaMekach comes along with it, the Malami Torah Lama Yisrael. The Eibishter says, V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'soicham. The koyach of the Mishkan is because the Eibishter gave us a Torah, and he took he gave up the Chem de Genuza of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this Mishtasheh b'chol yoyim, and he gave it to us, but the Eibishter says, Nimkarti ima, I sold myself with it. The Eibishter is the Malami Torah Lama Yisrael. This Maila of Malami Torah Lama Yisrael is in Bate Knesiyos and Bate Medrashas with Ashrayis Hashchina, Bais, which is Meyuchet for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Oymid the Meyuchet for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Bais is the Eibishter's Mishkan. It's base of Ani B'Rav Chazdech Avei Beisecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's there, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malami Torah Lama Yisrael. Tayrasi al tazoivu bala mekach. Kseda, my father Zatzal, there was always Yirasai Kedemis L'Chachmasai, the stressing that you're learning Teiras Hashem. The Torah is not Stam Chachma, it's a Teiras Hashem, and it's a way that we're double in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki Hashem Yitein Chachma. It's a Dveikus of Yisrael V'Raisa V'Kutsha B'Richu Chadu. Through Torah we become double in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We become double with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says, like Avram, Shekara Har, like Yitzchak, Shekara Sada. But Yaakov was Kara Bais. Yaakov's Midah was the Midah of Torah. Yaakov was Torah. Tferest, Yaakov was the Amura Torah. A Bais is someplace where we live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The bris HaTorah, the bris with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we become chad with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is we live in a home together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Maral says that Yaakov's midah was that Avram Avinu was chesed, so that's not bekviyas. Din, he says, also is not bekviyas. Yaakov's midah of rachamim, that's something kavua. The midah of Torah, through the bris HaTorah, is we become davuk in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the bias. Shemegadlim Torah Tefillah. Megadlim Lochem develop. Steiging is not just being a lamdin, not a baki, but you're learning Torah Hashem. The Torah is connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Torah is dveikus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing down the Ashroyis Hashchina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yeshiva Zatzal says a beautiful thing in the Kol Ram, brings down. Why wasn't the Torah given in Eretz Yisrael? I once heard from Rab Shach, I once heard was there at a Kennis, who spoke about this. Why wasn't Torah given in Eretz Yisrael? That's the Mokim Ashrois Hashchina. And the Yeshiva Zatzal asks that why Yaakov Avinu, why wasn't it a problem for him to go to Chutz La'aretz? Why wasn't it a problem for him to go to Chutz La'aretz? Yitzchak was Oylu Tmima, he couldn't leave Eretz Yisrael. But we see Yaakov was able to leave Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov was able to go into Golus. So he once spoke about this, the Vayivga B'Mokim, Vayolan Sham, and Yaakov went and he passed Hara Miriah. It says, Yoiv Daite, he was Yoiv Daite, to go ahead, and he was mokum that he wasn't mispal, but mokum shispal avoisav was Yoiv Daite, and Hara Miriah came to him. Normally kvitzas haderech is that the person gets to that place, and here the Hara Miriah came to him. So the Yeshiva Zatzal says that Yaakov's midah is Torah. He was the amud of Torah. Torah, wherever you learn it, you bring Eretz Yisrael here. That's why I see them, but you can see Bais Medrash of Bavel to end up going to Eretz Yisrael. The Kedusha, the Goin says, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael and Bais, you can see some Bais Medrash have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. A Bais Knesses that would bring Mechanech, a Bais Medrash, is a Mokim which is Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Through making it a Mokim, the whole Mokim becomes the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Torah has that koyach of being mispashet and taking over the koyach of the Olam Hagashmi and making it into kli. It could be mamish Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. It could remain that Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. That's what Yeshiva Zatzal says, that our chayriv, if the Matan Torah didn't have a Kedusha, the whole Kedusha was only Kol Zman des Torah there. The Kedushas HaTorah brings the Ashrois Hashchina and it gets Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Just to end off, my father Zatzal over here in the shtickle here, he says the Indian, why is it called Bais Medrash? My My father Zatzal, he spoke by Ner Yisrael, by the Chanukas Habayis. He spoke about this Nakuda. He says, why is it called Bais Medrash? It should be Bais Talmud, Bais Limud. He says the Indian of Drisha is Darash Moshe. It says Mitva Tabe Moshe. He says the oifen of Limud HaTorah has to be that you're Toveya, you're mourning, you're fighting for it. He says you come into Bais Medrash and people are learning very edel, with midas, very refined. It's missing the fact that a person feels this is my Torah. The fact that a person feels that I have a personal connection. Torah Hashem is Amachroi. If a person feels that Torah is Yisrael Baraisa V'Kutzbichu Chad, and there's an Asuin, there's a marriage through Torah. A person, Klal Yisrael, has that bris with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and somebody's tampering with the Torah, is your fight. There's a Mechamta Shel Torah. If a person is cold to the Torah, he's cold about it. He's cold about the Torah. It's not his. It's not. He doesn't feel that he's achroi for the Torah. Beis HaMedrash is a place where there's a Mechamta Shel Torah. Beis HaMedrash is a place where there's a Mechama that you take on, that it's my life and I'm going to fight for it. The Limud HaTorah that a person learns with Bisrakshas, Bispailos, Tefillah Bispailos, the koyach that the Torah, the Eisha Torah, that has the koyach to change over a person. My father Zatzal used to say over from Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, to change over a person, to make him a new person, mitoiv l'ra, mira l'toiv. To change over, you have to have the koyach of Espailus. There has to be a regesh, there has to be the Eisha Torah. Stop sich kochen and learning. The koching and learning is the Eish, is mechabe Eish, and it changes over a person. So Rav Oba says that somebody asked him, why is he such a verbrente chassid of Rabbi Yerucham? So he says, because Rabbi Yerucham at me verbrent. He ripped out, he burned out of me the German bacha and made me into the mirror bacha. Rav Oba says, he says in the mirror there was a thing when the Iceland, the people came from America, from Europe, and the older bachram would measure. So at gebitten, or is the same Deutsche, it's Americana. They used to judge. He changed a little bit. Epis Torah to Mois gebrennt. Rav Oba says that the Torah, to kasha out a person, the tefillah, the person should change, is through that Torah b'spailos. The ones that remember my father Zatzal, the Mechamta Shel Torah. He's scared. The Bachram was scared. He was mamash yelling, chair. He was once picked up a desk at a friend of mine. Mamash, a chair. He would sit over with the yelling that Rabbi Makim used to get, screaming at him, grabbing a hold of him. I couldn't understand. I couldn't wait and achamol. The Mechamta Shel Torah with alle midas, with alle musar. But Torah has to be koidvarai ke'esh num Hashem. My father, Zatzal, always liked the crowded Bais Medrash. I had a hard time learning in the small Bais Medrash, but he liked it. He liked when it was crowded. He says, look at the Olam's fighting, the Olam's koching, the Olam is, there's a risk of the rice. He used to have such a enough from that. When it's cramped and it's just automatically, everybody's yelling. We have to keep up. The Bais Medrash should be the koching and learning. In the time of the summer, there's a man of people naturally, p'sabissel menuchadik. We have a big rafchusdik of Bais Medrash. So you have to make sure that the koching and learning, the olam, to keep the chabura together, the rischa, the raisa, the koching zusammen and learning. Person through the koching and Torah and tefillah should be with that bren that changes over, that eish is machshe, is metayr a person. Man cholam azez moitzi mitumah l'tayra. Sa'av divrei Torah also bate midrashim a moitzi mitumah l'tayra. The koyach of libun of eish, the eish HaTorah is moitzi mituma l'Torah. It's mezachich the mensch from being a choimri to be a ruchni. Without very verbrent and learning, the Eibusher should help that the Shroshim should keep continuously being yoinik from Mirosh Surim, the Yeshiva Zatzal, all the other Rebbeim that were in the Yeshiva, Reb Shimon, my father, Reb Green, Shuzgal. They should weiter be yoinik, they should give the chiyus that we should be able to continue in the Mahalach, in that flavor that was this Bais Medrash Zavekestelt. Yizich Baruch.